Welcome back to Morgan's video blog, Morgan's online blog in video format. Today, I'm here to talk to you about tips and tricks to fix word count problems. So each type of book has its own expected word count, from chick lit to epic fantasy, from picture books to middle grade to adult. It's often easier to find traction with agents, publishers, and even readers when your story length meets expectations. All too often, writers end up with novels that are wildly outside of genre expectations and are forced to drastically cut or add to their novels. But before we can get to my tips for fixing those issues, let's talk about what the actual industry standards are. Thank you, Writer's Digest, for giving me this information. It'll be linked below, but I'm going to repeat the information so in case you don't go there, you have all the information you need. So, word counts by category and genre. Now, the default novel length is between 80,000 and 89,999 words, with some being as short as 70,000 and some being as long as 110. We all know there are exceptions, but there is a reason they are not industry standard. Big name authors can ignore convention and bestsellers ignore convention, but the odds that your novel is going to be a bestseller out of the gate are minuscule. So don't give your novel a black mark before you even get your foot in the door. Now, westerns and chick lits tend to be on the lower end of the spectrum, and memoirs tend to be towards the upper end, although it's said sometimes that's because the authors have trouble focusing the story when it's about their life. But before we go any further, let's just set your own mental calibration. 50,000 words is about 200 pages in a novel. So when I say 75, picture 300 pages. I think most books these days that I read are between 300 and 500 words, but that gets into the exception to the rule. Science fiction and fantasy, because they are not in the real world, the necessity of all the world building that you have to add adds words. So the genre expectation for science fiction and fantasy only is between 90,000 and 125,000. So that's sitting pretty high compared to everything else. The sweet spot is between 100 and 115,000. So if you can get your epic fantasy in under 115, you're probably sitting pretty. So let's talk about the age ranges. Board books have one word per page. I think you can figure that out. Picture books with their pictures and all tend to be printed as 32-page spreads with 8 pages on a single sheet with 4, and then they fold and cut them. And so it's 4 of those bound together. Because of the set size for picture books, there is not much wiggle room for length. 500 to 600 words tends to be standard, with 1,000 words pushing the limit of how much you can fit on one page, with the font at a size that is intended for non-readers or beginner readers. So next up are the early readers. These are intro to chapter books, and they max out about 1,500 words, and they usually still have pictures on most of the pages. Be warned, the market for these is pretty heavily dominated by the publishers, with well-established series and media tie-in characters featuring prominently. That issue carries on to the next category, which are chapter books. These are the next step after easy readers, and they're usually between 5,000 and 15,000 words, and usually read by 6 to 9-year-olds. And once they finish the chapter books, they're ready for middle grade novels. Yay! Middle grade novels are aimed at kids who have moved past chapter books, typically 8 to 12. They're split into 2 groups, upper and lower middle grade. Remember, kids like to read about kids that are slightly older than them. So 8-year-olds read about 10-year-olds. 12-year-olds read about 14-year-olds, etc. So lower middle grade novels are usually in the 20,000 to 35,000 page range, while upper middle grade hovers in the 40 to 55,000 page range. And you see how it steps up all nicely. Next up is YA novels. A lot of stories these days, particularly many coming of age stories, are aimed at young adults, even if plenty of adults read them too. 55,000 to 80,000 is industry standard. Some say you can go a little longer with sci-fi and fantasy, which I hope is the case because I know how long my YA is, but be wary. It's outside of standard and that makes it harder to sell. So now that we've talked about expected word count, we need to address that elephant in the room. Knowing where your novel should be word count wise is one thing. Actually, getting there is another. I find that most writers fall into one of two camps. They either underwrite and have to fill in their world, or they overwrite and have to trim and tighten up their story. And of course, there are those that do both. Too much description and too little character emotions, or too much emotional arc and not enough plot. Very few writers get it right just right out of the gate. I used the word right too many times. Let's just go with it. But what do you do when your novel is significantly outside of the genre expectation length? Let's talk about, well, for me, the easy one, when your novel is too short. There are plenty of small things you can do, fleshing out scenes, descriptions, expanding on things you kind of hinted at. But when you need a lot of words, you gotta do something more dramatic. Option A, add a point of view character. A new point of view character should add at least a third to your novel. Just please, for me, avoid just duplicating every scene from a second point of view. I find it best when there's maybe one or two chapters of that, but I want to see what they're doing when the other one's not watching. So, and option B is add a new subplot. Give your main character something else to juggle, be it a deadline, a kid, family issues, money woes. An additional struggle means additional words. Or maybe the subplot is for your secondary character. You know, they have a life outside of helping the main character. And if your main character is a good friend, they would want to help them when they can. So, now let's talk about when your novel is too long. On the flip side, these stories have grown wildly out of control. You can always trim the story down paragraph by paragraph. You can remove a tertiary character or 10. But when you've got more than a couple thousand words to cut, you usually need to take more drastic action. Let's start by reversing what I just suggested those underwriters do. You can remove a point of view. Every point of view character adds, as I said, about a third to your novel. You cut their point of view, you cut the novel length. Secondly, obviously, you can remove a subplot. Maybe we don't need that main character to juggle that job or deal with her brother's issues on top of her own. Next up, we can delete secondary or tertiary characters. Extra characters means extra description and actions and motivations. Removing a character can cut down on that a lot. Now, if you can't simply remove them, see if you can combine them with another character. Movie adaptations do this a lot because it is hard to fit the complexities of a novel or a series into 2.5 hours. And finally, when all else fails, you gotta just delete scenes. Maybe you don't want to do the surgery required for the others, they're pretty complicated, or maybe you've tried them all and you still need to trim. And in that case, you just gotta cut scenes from your novel. Drastically cutting your novel is not for the faint of heart, but never fear, you are on the blog of a chronic overwriter. You wrote all your scenes when you were feeling creative and artistic. They grew from the fertile soil of your imagination. Clearly, they are all there for a reason, and it's a struggle to figure out which ones to cut. Which of your children you want to cull. That's why I try to apply a little logic just to justify why I'm cutting this scene to myself. And of course, I will save old drafts so that scene is never truly lost, and maybe it gets a new coat of paint and added in somewhere else. So, when I gotta cut scenes, here are my 3 steps. First, I list all of my scenes with 1 to 2 sentence descriptions. Scenes, not chapters. The chapter breaks can happen in the middle of a scene, or there can be like 10 scenes in one chapter. I don't know how you broke up your story. Break it down by scene. Next, rank each scene. Give it like 1 point for world building, 1 point for progressing the character's emotional arc, and 1 for advancing the actual plot. Then examine the scenes that got 0 or 1 point. And you gotta decide, can the story stand without this scene? If so, it gotta go. Secondly, could this scene be added to make it do double duty and justify its place in the story? I do this more than I should. And finally, maybe you can combine this scene with another scene, potentially one that's underperforming as well, and bring them both up to snuff. And that's it. That's how I cut my first novel from 131,000 words down to a slim 75, and then it went back up to 90, but that's a whole different issue. It is agonizing. Drastically changing the size of your story is hard, but nobody ever promised you that writing would be easy. Have you ever drastically changed the length of your story other than like writing it? Did you use these techniques? If not, please share how you decided how to add or cut stuff. I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments below. As always, please subscribe, share me with all your friends and family. Thanks for watching, and check back again next week for more writing tips and writerly musings. Bye-bye.